Shikoku, Japan, February 1993. A man lies in a nursing home bed. No visitors. No flowers. Outside the window, rain. He stares at the ceiling. He has been staring at ceilings for a long time now. He is 80 years old. He has a gas station that barely breaks even. He has a wife who sells insurance so they can eat. He has a memoir that nobody outside Japan has read. And he has a secret he carried for 52 years before anyone thought to ask him about it. Because 52 years ago, this man knew Pearl Harbor better than any admiral the United States Navy had stationed there. He knew which ships were moored and where. He knew which day of the week the fleet was fullest in port. He knew which runways could launch 3 aircraft simultaneously. He knew the depth of the water at every point in the harbor. He was not an admiral. He never fired a weapon in his life. He bought a tourist boat ticket. And he looked down through the glass bottom. And he remembered everything he saw. His name was Takeo Yoshikawa. And before this video is over, you may find yourself sitting with a feeling you didn't expect. Not anger, not sympathy. Something harder to name than either of those. If stories like this one matter to you, hit that like button right now. Not for the number, because that's the only way this channel stays alive. And it's the only way these stories find the people who need to hear them. Because what I'm about to tell you doesn't start at Pearl Harbor. It starts in a small room in Japan, 10 years earlier. With a young man who had just been told by a Navy doctor that his life, the life he had planned, was over. Kasumigaura Naval Air Station, Japan, late 1934. Yoshikawa climbed into the cockpit. He didn't know it would be the last time, not because he flew badly, not because he froze. That morning, a military physician pressed a stethoscope to his chest, listened, and wrote 2 words into a file folder. Yoshikawa wasn't allowed to read what those words said, but he saw the doctor's face when he wrote them, and he understood. He took the paper back to his quarters, read it once, set it down on the desk. Then he sat there. He didn't telephone home. He didn't write a letter. What he wrote, later, in a diary that survived him, was that he no longer knew who he was. To understand what that cost him, you have to understand what Japan was in 1934. Not the Japan of 1946, rebuilding from rubble. Not the Japan of today. The Japan of 1934 was a country that told its young men exactly one thing. Your worth is measured by what you are willing to sacrifice. Yoshikawa was born in Matsuyama, on the island of Shikoku. His father was a policeman, not a general, not a merchant, a local policeman in a provincial town. The kind of man who stood at attention when officers walked past. For a boy from that family, in that country, in that year, becoming a naval aviator wasn't just ambition. It was the only way to become someone his father could hold his head up about. He passed the entrance exams for the Naval Academy at Itajima, graduated in 1933, 92nd out of 116 men. He got in. He got through. He was assigned to the armored cruiser Asama, then to submarines, then finally to flight training. He was 22 years old. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. And then, the stomach. The illness came on gradually, then didn't leave. He went home to recover in 1935. The Navy kept his file open. He kept waiting for the call to come back. It came in 1936. Not the call he was waiting for. The Navy told him he was medically unfit to continue active service. He was discharged, at the rank of ensign, after 3 years. In the Imperial Japanese Navy, there was no graceful way to absorb that. He later wrote that he thought about ending his life. He was 24 years old, discharged from the only institution that had given him a sense of purpose, trying to figure out what a man does when the door he spent his whole life walking toward is quietly, permanently, closed. A year passed. Then, in 1937, an envelope arrived. Naval General Staff Headquarters, Tokyo. Inside, a transfer order. Intelligence Division, U.S. Navy and United Kingdom Section. No explanation. No choice. He reported for duty. What followed was 4 years in a room with no window. A room. No window. Tokyo. Every morning, he sat down at a desk and read. Jane's Fighting Ships, the British Naval Almanac that listed every warship in every fleet in the world, right down to displacement tonnage and gun caliber, the Congressional Record, the published proceedings of the United States Congress, available to anyone who wanted to order it, full of budget debates where American senators talked openly about how many ships they were building and where they were going. Travel brochures for Hawaii, steamship schedules from San Francisco to Honolulu, newspaper clippings, radio transcripts. Nobody told him why. He read everything. He memorized what he read. And after 4 years, he knew more about the layout of the United States Pacific Fleet than most of the men serving in it. In late 1940, his superior called him in and gave him a verbal briefing. Nothing was written down. The assignment: go to Hawaii. Watch, report. He was given a new name, Tadashi Morimura, a diplomat's passport, the title of vice consul. He left for Hawaii on March 27, 1941. In every war, there are men who didn't choose what they became. They only chose what to do after the first door closed, and the men at Pearl Harbor, painting their ships, writing letters home, eating breakfast on Sunday mornings, had no idea that a quiet young man with a diplomat's passport was already on his way to study them. March 27, 1941. The Japanese ocean liner Nita Maru eased into Pier 8 at Honolulu Harbor, alongside the Aloha Tower. One of the passengers who walked down the gangway that morning was a 29-year-old man of medium height. Black hair combed straight back, civilian clothes, nothing about him that made you look twice. In his jacket pocket, a diplomatic passport in the name of Tadashi Morimura, Vice Consul, Japanese Consulate General, Honolulu. His real name appeared on no document in Hawaii. A consulate official walked him through customs, drove him to the 2-story building on Nuuanu Avenue. He met the Consul General, Nagao Kita, one of only 2 men in all of Honolulu who knew what Tadashi Morimura was actually there to do. He unpacked his bags, went to bed. In the morning, he stood at a second-floor window and looked west. 7 miles away, across the flat water of the coastal plain, he could see the silhouettes. Battleships. He couldn't read their hull numbers from that distance. He didn't need to. He could count them. He could tell which ones had moved overnight, which berths were full, which were empty. He stood at that window every morning before he walked to the consulate. Honolulu in the spring of 1941 was a city that did not know it was being watched. Navy officers walked the sidewalks in uniform without looking over their shoulders. The weather was warm. The restaurants were full on Friday nights. On weekends, the beaches at Waikiki were crowded with sailors on liberty. They talked about baseball, about the girls back home, about whether the United States was going to get dragged into the war in Europe. Nobody was talking about Japan. Not seriously. Not yet. His colleagues at the consulate thought he was lazy, always disappearing after lunch, not coming back until the following day. They assumed he was sleeping somewhere, seeing someone. The things young men do when their afternoons are their own. No one asked him where he went. 2 weeks after he arrived, Yoshikawa composed his first telegram to Tokyo. Tokyo responded immediately, and from that point forward, twice a week, as regular as the mail, he sent his reports. Each one encrypted, each one transmitted from the consulate's code room, each one received in Tokyo, decoded, and passed up the chain. The rhythm of it settled in quickly. Window in the morning, into the city by afternoon, back to his quarters after dark. Write what he had seen. Encode it. Send it. Week after week. Through spring, through summer, into fall. What Yoshikawa didn't know was that the Americans were reading some of his messages. U.S. military intelligence had broken the Japanese diplomatic code. In September 1941, a message came through that should have stopped everything cold. Tokyo was asking Morimura to divide Pearl Harbor into 5 distinct zones and report the location of warships in each zone separately. That is the kind of request you make when you are planning exactly where to send your bombs. The message was flagged, logged, marked low priority. It wasn't fully decoded until the middle of October. The analyst who read it didn't see anything worth escalating, just ship positions, routine stuff. He filed it and moved on. There were no gadgets, no hidden radio transmitters, no miniature cameras sewn into coat linings, no ciphered messages written in invisible ink. What Yoshikawa had was a good memory, a willingness to go anywhere that was technically open to the public, and enough patience to go back to the same places until he understood what he was looking at. Kaneohe Bay sits on the eastern side of Oahu, a wide, shallow bay that opens to the Pacific. The Navy had been talking about using it as an alternative anchorage for the fleet. Tokyo wanted to know if that was feasible. Yoshikawa bought a ticket for the glass-bottom boat tour. The boat moved slowly over the reef. The tour guide explained the coral formations, the species of fish, the history of the bay. Yoshikawa nodded along. He was watching the bottom, calculating depth, running the numbers, draft of a battleship, clearance from the reef at low tide. He made the trip several times, different sections of the bay each time. His conclusion: too shallow. The fleet couldn't use it. He reported that to Tokyo. Tokyo crossed Kaneohe Bay off the list. From that point on, there was only one target. The boat tours were only part of it. On the slopes of Aloha Heights, above the city, there was a Japanese tea house called the Shunchō-ro, the Spring Tide Restaurant. The proprietress was a woman named Taneo Fujiwara, from the same prefecture in Japan as Yoshikawa, Ehime, on the island of Shikoku. The tea house had sake. It had geishas. It had a second-floor window that looked directly down over Pearl Harbor, Ford Island, and Hickam Army Airfield. And it had a telescope. Yoshikawa became a regular. Most evenings he drank and made conversation, and behaved the way a young diplomat with too much free time would behave. But on certain nights, the nights he needed to work, he drank more than he usually did, or appeared to. He let himself go slack. He let his eyes go heavy. And when the other guests started leaving, when the geishas said goodnight, when the proprietress began closing up the back rooms, Yoshikawa was already the last one there, left alone in the second-floor room, with the telescope at the window, with the full harbor laid out below him in the dark. He memorized what he saw, walked back down the hill in the dark, wrote nothing down until he was alone. On some of those evenings, U.S. Navy officers were at the tea house too, eating dinner, a few tables away, laughing about something. Nobody's business but their own. Nobody's business at all. He also went up. At John Rogers Airport, Yoshikawa rented small aircraft and flew over the island. He always brought a woman with him. Not the same woman twice. Never the same woman twice. In the air, she looked out the window and commented on the view. The green mountains, the white beaches, the harbor glittering below. He looked out the window, too. He counted the runways at Wheeler Field. He counted the hangars at Hickam. He felt the wind at altitude, the direction, the strength, how it shifted over the ridgeline. Information about those air currents would eventually find its way into the flight briefings for the pilots who launched from Japanese carriers before dawn on December 7th. Those pilots never knew who had flown the same air before them. There was one thing Tokyo still needed: the anti-submarine barriers at the entrance to Pearl Harbor, their depth, their configuration, whether a torpedo could pass underneath them. Yoshikawa went to the beach at Mamala on a dark night in the fall. He waded in. He dove under, using a hollow reed as a breathing tube. No gear, no tank. Nothing that would look out of place if anyone happened to be watching the shoreline. The water was cold. The current pushed him around. He came up without what he needed. The next morning, he sent Tokyo a 2-word telegram. Details unclear. That was the only time, in 9 months of work, that he sent a message like that. Through all of it, the boats, the tea house, the flights, the beach at night. His colleagues believed he was the laziest diplomat they had ever worked with. He disappeared for hours at a time. They shook their heads and kept working. The FBI had a file on the Honolulu consulate. They had a name in that file, Tadashi Morimura, vice consul, young, moved around a lot. That was the whole file. The man they were actually looking for, Japan's only military intelligence agent in Hawaii, was renting glass-bottom boats and drinking sake on a hillside with his hands in plain view. No code books, no dead drops, no radio equipment hidden in the walls, just a memory that held everything it was given, and eyes that knew exactly what to look for. Saturday, December 6th, 1941. Honolulu. Evening. On Battleship Row, the USS Arizona rode at anchor in berth F7. She had been there all week. On the mess decks, a group of men were playing cards. Someone was losing badly and letting everyone know about it. In the galley, the cooks were already prepping Sunday breakfast. Scrambled eggs, biscuits, the kind of morning meal you put together when there's nothing much on the schedule. Men were writing letters home. Some of them to mothers in Ohio and Georgia and Oregon. Some of them to wives they had married the year before. Some of them to fathers who had served in the last war and wanted to know what it was like over there. Men were reading, sleeping. The ship sat low in the water, heavy and still. The harbor was quiet. Music came from somewhere across the water. Someone's radio turned up too loud, the notes carrying flat and thin across the dark. Nobody on that ship was thinking about the morning. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, was that in an intelligence file in Tokyo, the USS Arizona's exact position had been mapped and recorded months earlier. Berth F7, Battleship Row. The man who had put it there was sitting on a hillside 7 miles away. On Aloha Heights, Yoshikawa sat at the window of the Shuncho row. Below him, the lights of Pearl Harbor spread across the dark water. He didn't use the telescope that night. He didn't need to. In the summer, a Japanese intelligence officer had come through Honolulu disguised as a steward on a commercial ocean liner. He carried a list. 97 questions about Pearl Harbor, depth of the harbor entrance channel, position of the fuel storage tanks, the patrol schedule of the aircraft based at Wheeler and Hickam, whether the fleet was ever fully in port at the same time, and if so, which day of the week. Sunday, Yoshikawa had written back. He had answered all 97. His work was done. He poured another drink and looked at the lights below. At 1:20 in the morning of December 7th, far out at sea, aboard the Japanese fleet carrier Akagi, Vice Admiral Nagumo Chuichai was handed a telegram. He read it by the light on the bridge. Vessels moored in harbor, 9 battleships, 3 light cruisers, 3 seaplane tenders, 17 destroyers. All aircraft carriers and heavy cruisers have departed harbor. No indication of any changes in fleet alert status or anything unusual. That was the last message Takeo Yoshikawa ever sent. Nagumo set the paper down, gave the order. 353 aircraft began moving to the flight decks. Yoshikawa didn't know his telegram was being read on the Akagi. Nagumo didn't know the name of the man who wrote it. The men on the Arizona didn't know either of those men existed. 3 men, 1 harbor, 1 night. By morning, only 2 of those 3 facts would still be true. 7:55 a.m., December 7th, 1941. The first wave came from the north, 183 aircraft. The pilots who flew that morning had been trained for months on attack routes, and approach angles developed from intelligence reports about where the ships were, which runways were operational, where the fuel lines ran. Reports written by a man who had watched all of it through a borrowed telescope from a hillside in the dark. The USS Arizona took a bomb between her two forward gun turrets. It punched through the deck and detonated the forward ammunition magazine. The explosion shook buildings across Honolulu. Men on ships across the harbor felt it before they heard it. A pressure wave through the hull, through the deck plates, through the soles of their feet. Then the sound. Then the column of black smoke, rising so fast and so thick it blotted out the sky above Ford Island. 1,177 men died in under 9 minutes. The men writing letters home the night before. The men playing cards. The men sleeping. The ship sank in 40 feet of water. She is still there. Yoshikawa was standing at a consulate window when the smoke began rising from Pearl Harbor. 7 miles. Black columns. The sound reached him a few seconds after the light. There is no written record of what he thought in those minutes at the window. No diary entry. No account from anyone standing near him. He watched. That's all we know. But here is what Yoshikawa did not know that morning, and what I need you to sit with for a moment. His final telegram had contained one line that would change the outcome of the entire war. All aircraft carriers and heavy cruisers have departed harbor. He had reported it as a routine observation, the kind of detail he noted every time the fleet shifted. USS Enterprise was ferrying aircraft to Wake Island. USS Lexington was delivering planes toward Midway Atoll. USS Saratoga was undergoing repairs on the west coast. Nagumo read that line, confirmed the carriers were not in port, and chose not to send a search mission. The attack would proceed as planned. The carriers could be dealt with later. There was no later. Lexington was lost at the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, before Midway was ever fought. Saratoga arrived at Pearl Harbor on June 6, 1942, the day after the battle at Midway ended. She missed it by 1 day, but Enterprise survived. And at Midway, in June 1942, Enterprise and 2 other carriers, Hornet and the damaged Yorktown, patched together in 72 hours at Pearl Harbor, met the Japanese fleet. In a single afternoon, on June 4, 1942, American dive bombers sank 4 Japanese fleet carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, gone. The Japanese Navy never recovered. The momentum of the entire Pacific War shifted in the space of a single morning. Now, if your father served in the Pacific, if he came home, if you grew up knowing his face across the dinner table, think about what the road home looked like. Midway, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Iwo Jima. The Long Island hopping campaign that ground its way back toward Japan, one bloody beach at a time. None of it unfolds the same way if those carriers are sitting in Pearl Harbor on December 7th. None of it. The man who reported them gone, who wrote that single line as a plain Saturday night fact, was standing at a consulate window 7 miles away, watching the smoke rise, and had no idea what that line had just preserved. He never knew. He went to his grave not knowing that a piece of paper he filled out on a Saturday night may have been part of the reason someone you love came home. Take a moment with that. Because I don't know how to tell you where to put that feeling. I'm not sure there is a place for it. A few hours after the attack began, American soldiers arrived at the Japanese consulate and placed everyone inside under guard. Yoshikawa sat in a room and answered questions. Name: Tadashi Morimura. Title: Vice Consul. Anything unusual about his activities? No. J. Edgar Hoover wanted to prosecute. He knew there had been a Japanese agent in Honolulu. The State Department said no. Prosecution would put American consular staff overseas at risk. They would let the diplomatic staff go. In February 1942, Yoshikawa and 22 other consulate employees were transferred to a remote guest ranch in Arizona, the Triangle T Ranch, guarded by Border Patrol agents who had no idea who they were watching. The FBI questioned them for weeks. They were looking for Tadashi Morimura. He answered every question, politely, in English. They wrote in his file, nothing of note. He was repatriated through a prisoner exchange. He stepped off the ship in Yokohama still carrying a passport in someone else's name. The name Takeo Yoshikawa does not appear once in the 10 million words of the Joint Congressional Committee report on the attack on Pearl Harbor, published in 1946. Not once. Back in Tokyo, he returned to work for naval intelligence. His mission remained classified. The people he lived with did not know what he had done. He said nothing. Japan surrendered in August 1945. Yoshikawa didn't wait to see what happened next. He moved into a Zen Buddhist temple on Shikoku and didn't come out for 4 years. No name, no contact. He shaved his head. He wore monk's clothing. He sat in rooms where no one asked about the war because everyone in those rooms was trying to forget the same thing. The first time, he had hidden his name on orders from the Navy. This time, he hid it because he was afraid. The American occupation of Japan ended in 1952. He came back out slowly, returned to his wife, tried to figure out what a man does with a secret no one wants to hear. In 1955, he opened a small candy shop on Shikoku. Word got around. Neighbors stopped coming in. One man said it to his face. "You're the reason they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima." The shop closed within a few months. In 1961, CBS invited him to appear on a television program marking the 20th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. He said yes, he needed the money. In Japan, the reaction split cleanly down 2 lines. The nationalist right called him a traitor for cooperating with Americans. The anti-war left called him a war criminal for what he had done in the first place. The Japanese government said nothing. No pension, no formal recognition, no acknowledgement that he had ever served. He opened a gas station on Shikoku, the same island where he had hidden in Buddhist temples for 4 years after the war. Every morning, his wife set his coffee down in front of him before he asked. She had married him after the war, knowing only pieces of what he had done. Over the years, she had learned the rest. She never told anyone. She knew his name. She knew what he had done, and she was the only person in his life for whom those 2 things were connected, and neither one of them a source of shame. He told a reporter once, "My wife alone shows me great respect. Every day she bows to me. She knows I am a man of history." His wife sold insurance. He sat by the window with a glass in his hand and looked at nothing in particular. He wrote his memoirs in 1963, published in Japan. For 57 years, no one translated them into English. The English translation appeared in 2020, 27 years after he died. There is one more thing worth knowing. After Pearl Harbor, 120,000 Japanese Americans were removed from their homes and sent to internment camps. The government pointed to the existence of a Japanese spy in Honolulu as part of the justification. Yoshikawa wrote about this in his memoirs. He wrote that the Japanese American community in Hawaii had never helped him, that when he approached them, the answer was always the same: "I am an American." These were people born in Hawaii, who had gone to American schools, who had sons serving in the United States Army. They owed Yoshikawa nothing. They gave him nothing. And yet, after December 7th, their loyalty didn't matter. The people who lost their homes, their businesses, their property, had nothing to do with what Yoshikawa had done. He knew that. He wrote it down. He never said it publicly, while it might have mattered. History didn't know where to put him. He wasn't villain enough for a war crimes trial. He wasn't hero enough for a monument. He was a man who had done exactly what he was told to do, done it better than anyone else could have done it, and spent the rest of his life waiting for someone to say, "We know. We see what you did." It mattered. Nobody said it. Not the Navy he had served. Not the country he had given his career to. Not the government that had sent him to Hawaii with a false name and a diplomat's passport, and no plan whatsoever for what came after. He died on February 20th, 1993, in a nursing home on Shikoku, outside the window. Rain. I'm not telling you this story, so you'll feel sorry for him. I'm not asking you to forgive him for what his work made possible.